2022 Genesis GV70, and it's the latest model from Genesis, a sporty luxury compact SUV. It's about the same size as a BMW X3 or a Mercedes GLC, and it's on the sportier side of other Genesis models. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website with cool cars from the modern era. We've had some great sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this beautiful Porsche 997 Turbo sold for $90,000 with a 6-speed manual transmission. This fantastic Porsche 996 Targa brought almost $33,000, a very rare car. And this fantastic Mercedes C63 AMG brought almost $44,000. These are having a moment right now. If you're looking to sell your cool enthusiast car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. And if you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, check out Cars and Bids with daily auctions of cool cars and great selection. I've borrowed this GV70 from TUTTLE-CLICK Genesis, which is the Genesis dealership here in Irvine in Southern California. TUTTLE-CLICK has all of the latest Genesis models, including the new GV70, which is just starting to reach dealerships. To find out more about the GV70 and TUTTLE-CLICK Genesis, click the link in the description below to head to TUTTLE-CLICK's website. So let's talk GV70. This is based on the Genesis G70 sports sedan, and like I said, it has sort of a sportier focus than other Genesis models, certainly sportier than the GV80, which is Genesis' other sort of larger luxury-focused crossover. This comes standard with rear-wheel drive and has optional all-wheel drive, and there are two engine choices, a turbo 4-cylinder with 300 horsepower or a turbo V6 with a muscular 375 horsepower, like in this one. As for market position, the GV70 is sized to compete with the Lexus NX, the BMW X3, and the Audi Q5, and pricing is pretty reasonable. These start around $41,000, which is relatively affordable, especially when you consider equipment levels. This particular example is a Sport Prestige model, top of the line, with a sticker price around $64,000. And today, I'm going to review it. First, I'll take you on a tour of the new GV70 and show you all of the quirks and features of the latest Genesis model. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DougScore. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the GV70 inside. I got to say, the first thing you notice when you get in here, the interior is absolutely beautiful. Truly amazing for a vehicle in this segment at this price point. Genesis interiors tend to be like a little nicer than the competition, but this is really a step above. This competes with the Lexus NX, and it blows that interior out of the water. The design, the layout, the materials in here are absolutely fantastic stuff. There's really nothing cheap. There's no like cheap, ugly, out of place materials, and instead everything is really nice. Just for example, the carbon fiber trim on the door panel you can see looks really good, and on the sides of the center console it looks really, really nice. You have an enormous amount of beautiful aluminum trim in here instead of like cheap, ugly plastic nobody wants. Everything is fantastic in this interior. Now I know that this is the top trim GV70 with a sticker price around $65,000, so they won't all look like this, but this interior at this price point is truly amazing, probably the best in any compact luxury SUV, including the Porsche Macan. Yes, I'm saying it. And it's not just the materials, it's also the way that it looks in here, the way it's been designed. For instance, you have this beautiful sort of oval shape on the lower half of the driver's side of the dashboard, going from the center all the way to the left of the steering wheel. A nice piece of design, trimmed in aluminum, looks great. And I love how they've integrated the climate vents into this portion of the dashboard, this line over on the passenger side, so you don't have like ugly climate vents sticking out. They're just sort of in there, almost hidden and out of place. Again, really good design in here. And another thing I love in this interior, you don't see a lot of Hyundai in here. Genesis is obviously Hyundai's luxury brand, and a lot of brands that have like a luxury version and a mainstream version will share at least some parts, but I don't see any like cheaper looking Hyundai stuff in here. A good example of this, the window switches, mirror controls, and the door panel. Look at that. They're not cheap plastic like in Hyundai's. They're this beautiful aluminum look. It's fantastic. Looks way more luxury and upscale. Here's another great touch. I often complain that cars with even really nice interiors interiors will have like cheap plastic turn signal and wiper stalks, but in this car, they've put aluminum at the end of the turn signal and wiper stalks. The part you actually touch has this sort of heavy aluminum feel, which counteracts that cheap plastic that most brands do. That's fantastic attention to detail. And even the steering wheel, the horn pad, has contrast stitching, 2 rows of contrast stitching going around the entirety of the horn pad, which is something you virtually never see on any brand's luxury cars. Again, great attention to detail. And another great detail, even the center console, this little storage lid is leather, red leather trim to match the rest of the console, and also trimmed in aluminum on the outside. So you open it up and there's like little spots where you can put cords or store something in there. A little storage lid nobody cares about. Most people just stick a plastic cover on it. Not here. It's just really nice. Everything in this interior is really nice. But anyway, next up, onto the rest of the quirks and features. And I want to start with the climate controls, which are in the center control stack integrated into a screen. Now, usually when climate controls are in a screen, you start to get a little nervous. Most people prefer like hard buttons for that stuff, but they've done it pretty well here. For one thing, you don't have them in the infotainment screen. So they're not sharing space with other stuff where you have to like go to a certain screen to see your climate controls. They have their own dedicated climate control screen, as you can see. And the layout is pretty good, actually. On the sides, you have your heated and cooled seat controls, which is pretty easy. And then as you move in, you have more climate controls. You can see you can change the direction of the airflow, the amount of the airflow, all pretty easily on this screen, various other things. And you can use these hard fixed dials to change the air temperature. Driver and passenger side, of course, have their own dials, which is pretty nice. So this integration of the climate controls into a screen, they make you a little nervous, but actually it works out pretty well, and it looks really good. Now, also good looking in this center area is the dial you use to shift into gear. It's right here in the middle, and you twist it to go into reverse neutral drive. Drives all the way to the right, reverse all the way to the left, and then if you want to go into park, you press the center, the P, and that puts you in park. Now, interestingly, there is another dial near this one. This controls the infotainment system. And you can see it's beautiful. It looks almost crystal, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Although I do sort of question the decision to put these identically shaped and sized controllers right next to each other, and they perform such vastly different functions. In fact, just moving this car around, I've already twice gone to shift into gear and instead moved the infotainment dial. Now, this isn't a big deal. Nothing important happens when you do that. You just move the screen a little bit, and the feedback between the two dials is very different, so you're not really going to mistake them that often, but just by feel, having them right next to each other, not really an ideal situation. But anyway, we'll move on to the infotainment system shortly. First, I want to talk through some other interesting quirks and features of this interior. Next, I'm going to move on to this little button on the side of the seat. You press that, and it activates the ergo motion seat controls. Specifically, there are several air cells inside the seat that will like expand and retract depending on which control you select. It's sort of like a seat massaging function, although it's not quite that far. You can't get like a shiatsu massage like in some cars, but you do have these air bladders sort of pressing on your body to kind of relax you and make you feel a little bit nicer while you're sitting in the car driving down the road. Also, another interesting control, back to the center console, you have these two dials in the middle, sort of on the left and the right. The one on the left controls your radio volume. You push it up for volume up, down for volume down, and you can also push it in to turn on or off the radio, which is kind of cool. The one on the right is more interesting. That's your tuner, and as you move that up or down, it cycles through all the radio stations, like an old school knob that you would use to tune through the radio stations. Here you have that in the form of this sort of nifty and interesting dial. Kind of a cool control. Now, also in this vicinity, you can see there's a little button with a P on it and like a camera. You press that and it pulls up your camera system in this car, which of course is very comprehensive, very high resolution, very nice, and it has that surround view, like 3D camera system I love that actually shows the car. The camera on the outside almost looks like there's a little drone hovering around your car, and you can change the angle of that and see just about anywhere you want to go. Makes parking tremendously easy in this car, and any visibility issues you might have are kind of solved by the thoroughness of this camera system. And by the way, speaking of cool views with this car, the gauge cluster is 3D. Now, it's difficult for me to show this to you using like a camera. You have to kind of see it with your eyes, but the way it works is you look at the gauge cluster, it's a screen, but it's not just a flat screen. Things are like on different levels, and it looks like a 3D screen. You don't need to wear 3D glasses. You just look at it and you see it. This is maybe the future of like gauge cluster technology. These screens have gotten so high resolution and so quick to respond that now they're experimenting with like making them actually look 3D. And Genesis models have like the first application of that I've seen, and it's really amazing. Feels very futuristic. Now, I can't really show you that, but I can show you another thing in this gauge cluster that's really cool, and that would be the turn signal cameras. When you're driving along, you put on your turn signal and a camera appears showing your blind spot, so you don't have to do like an over-the-shoulder check. Instead, you have a camera right in front of you showing what's over there, and it works on both sides, left or right. These cameras show what's in your blind spot the moment you put on the turn signal. It's a really great feature for highway merging, passing, whatever. It's fantastic. I love the integration of it. I love that it's here, and I wish all cars had it. A lot of Hyundai, Genesis, and Kia models do, and I hope it spreads throughout the industry. But anyway, next we move back to the infotainment system, the screen in the center of this interior, which has some drawbacks and some benefits. To me, one of the big drawbacks is it's very far away from you. This is a touch screen, but to actually touch it, you have to reach really far up, and frankly, you're not really going to do that all that often, and so you're mostly going to be controlling the screen with this controller. One drawback there is your presets aren't nearby. They're not easy to access. Most cars that have a screen this far away have a row of like radio presets near you, so you can just tap a radio station and go. But in this car, you actually have to go to the radio menu and then find your preset, and it just adds extra steps for something that should be especially easy. That's why you save presets and favorites to just tap, and it's not that simple in this car. And in fact, that's generally true of everything. If you want to just use the screen as a touch screen, you're going to find it's a little bit more difficult because it's so far away, and you have to use this controller, which complicates things to an extent. Now, with that said, there are some big benefits with this screen. One is it's absolutely huge. It's not like very tall, but it's tremendously wide, and that has some great implications. For one thing, you can see multiple things on this screen at once. So you can see right now I have like the radio on the left side of the screen, and I have the map over on the right side of the screen, so I don't have to go away from the map if I have navigation going in order to go to the radio, and vice versa. And that is a pretty cool touch. When you're on your home screen, you can also see a lot of different options in here for stuff that you want to see. They can display all this because the screen is so wide that they have a lot of room to put stuff in. By the way, speaking of that map, one interesting thing in the infotainment screen, you see it has a Kia dealership on it. It's right there. It's funny that they programmed the Kia dealers into the Genesis models, although it doesn't have the Genesis dealer on it that I'm sitting in. It only has a nearby Kia dealer. I guess they must share the same software with Kia, but it's just kind of funny to see that on there. But anyway, aside from that, nothing too weird or interesting or quirky in this infotainment system, although you do have sounds of nature, which is in all these Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis models, where you can play nature sounds instead of listening to music or a podcast or whatever. There's preloaded nature sounds that will calm and relax you. Take a listen to one of them. Now, one other item with this infotainment system worth noting, I do love this row of buttons going along the bottom below the climate controls that allow you easy access to various parts of the screen. So for instance, if you do want to access your radio presets, you don't have to use this controller to go over to the radio. You can just press radio and it pops up, but then you do have to use the controller to go to your presets from there. These hard buttons make it easy to navigate between different parts of the screen, and they sort of counteract some of the drawback of having the touch screen so far and hard to reach, because you can easily pull up like the easiest, most common stuff with these buttons, and that is a pretty nice touch. But still, I like this infotainment system. I think it's easy to use. I just wish it was a little bit closer, or maybe the favorites were a little bit easier to access. But anyway, next we move on to the back seat in the GV70, and I have to say, it is surprisingly nice back here. Now, it's not surprisingly roomy. This is a compact luxury crossover, and I don't have an enormous amount of room. I have okay headroom, okay legroom, but if you really want to use the back seat a lot, especially to transport adults, you're going to want the larger GV80. And that's why I'm surprised how nice it is back here. Most people who will want a back seat that's used frequently will step up to the GV80. They didn't have to make this that nice, but they did. Take a look, for instance, at the door panel. You can see, again, beautiful red leather, that gorgeous carbon trim, aluminum accents everywhere, no cost cutting even for the back seats. And you also have a rear sunshade built into the back door. You lift it up here and hook it on for people who have infants, want to keep them out of the sun, or if your rear passengers just don't want to be bothered by sun. That's a nice touch, especially in a compact luxury SUV. You rarely see it. Now, another nice luxury touch back here, climate controls. You do have rear seat climate controls, your own zone for the back seats. You can adjust everything here. Not quite as nice as that front climate screen, but still very nice, very adjustable. And you do have heated rear seats back here, which is another nice touch. Also in this vicinity, you have power ports, as you can see, including a household power outlet, which is always nice to have, especially for backseat passengers to charge their device or use their devices back here or whatever. One interesting rear seat item is the fact that you have controls on the side of the front seat to move it forward if you're sitting in the back. You can move the entire seat forward or just the backrest forward, which seems a little odd for a car like this. Chauffeur-driven vehicles, big Mercedes have that feature. Seems kind of strange to have it in a small luxury SUV, but there it is, adding to the luxury of the back seat. And next up, we move on to the cargo area in the GV70, and just opening the tailgate is kind of a quirk of its own. You'll notice the license plate is mounted very low in this car, so if the tailgate popper was in its usual place, you'd be reaching down very low just to open up the tailgate, so they've hidden it on the rear wiper assembly. You can see it here sort of integrated in the assembly, a little image of an SUV with its tailgate up. You press that, and then the tailgate pops open, and that's how you get back here. That's a pretty cool integration that solves that issue. Now, when you're in the cargo area, a couple of interesting features. One is you can drop the back seats here, although it is not power operated like it is in the larger GV80. Instead, you just pull this little latch, and then the seat will go down. Same thing over on the other side. You just pull the latch, and the seat goes down, and you can see there's a nice 60-40 split fold back here. If you want the seats to go back up, because there's no power operation, you got to go over to the seats themselves and actually push them into place. One other cool feature of the cargo area, you do have a little power port back here so you can run devices. Cigarette lighter style port, not a regular household, but it's here for some power in the cargo area. Now, as for the sizing of the cargo area, you'll notice that it's quite large in here, although the load floor is unusually high above the license plate, and it keeps things pretty high. The spare tire is below the load floor, so there's not like extra storage underneath, and that limits your cargo space just a little bit. Your space is also limited by the design of the car. It sort of has this sloping roof in the cargo area, and you can see on the side how that kind of eats into the cargo space compared to a more boxy SUV. If you have like a giant box back here, the tailgate may not be able to close around it because of this kind of sloping design. But anyway, since I've started to touch on it, let's talk design. You are looking at undoubtedly the GV70's most distinctive angle back here, the rear 3/4. And you can see that it has that sloping roofline, as a lot of modern SUVs and crossovers do. But the strange part is that the roofline trim kind of goes along the top of the side windows, and then it curves down below the actual back window. It's an odd decision, and it really accentuates this pillar here, which is colored in the body color of the car. This is especially true on lighter color cars. Here's a white GV70, and again, you can really see this sort of distinctive look on the side of the car. Very unusual, and definitely makes this have its own special look. You won't confuse these for anything else on the road. Actually, surprisingly, I like it. It's certainly a daring move doing this kind of weird design on the side, but they pulled it off well, and like other Genesis models, I think it looks great and nice and distinctive, which more and more crossovers just aren't these days. Another unusual and kind of daring decision from Genesis is the wheels. You can see sort of normal 5-spoke wheels, but as you get closer, you see the spokes have sort of a honeycomb waffle design to them, which again is kind of daring, kind of weird, and I like it. They pull it off, and it looks good. Kind of an odd decision, but I think they executed it well on these wheels. Now, in terms of design, one thing I don't like quite as much is around back, the look of sort of the lower half of the rear of the car. You can see it's a lot of plastic back here, frankly. It's sort of cheap looking plastic, again with this crosshatch pattern, but I just don't love how it looks. And it's kind of funny, Genesis went to such great lengths to avoid cheap looking plastic in the interior, and they did a great job. And then you sort of have the exterior, this spot where a lot of people will see kind of covered in cheap plastic. I don't really like the look of this. But with that said, one thing around back that I very much do like is the tail lights, and specifically the turn signals. You have like 2-row turn signals. They are individual assemblies. They light up together, and they look very cool and very classy and luxurious. And it's the same deal up front. You have sort of these 2 lines of turn signal, which look classy, which look very upscale and kind of help promote Genesis as this nice luxury brand, even though it's kind of an upstart. And by the way, since I'm outside, it's worth noting this car can drive by itself using a remote control. Check this out. You get the key fob here, and you can see there are a lot of buttons on the key fob, kind of a complicated one. The button that says P with a little arrow in a car, you press that, and the car will start moving. I am not in the car, I'm standing next to it pressing that button, and it's going forward all on its own. You can do the same thing going backwards by pressing the other arrow button on the key fob. Now the car is going backwards automatically using the remote control, the key fob, it's just doing it. Now the car won't go like high speeds doing this and won't turn. The entire intent here is if you're in a tight parking space, you press that button and it can pull itself out of the parking space, and then you can climb in more comfortably and more easy. But it is certainly an unusual feature, and it's now appearing on more Hyundai and Genesis models, including this one. And finally, we move under the hood of the GV70, and like I mentioned, there are two different powertrain options. Your base engine is pretty powerful in itself. That's a turbo 4-cylinder with 300 horsepower, pretty good for a car this size. But this one has a turbo V6 with 375 horsepower, which is really good for a car this size. It's a really muscular engine, and it's about the same horsepower as a BMW X3 M40i, which is like the sporty M Sport version of that car. Well, it's matched in power by this Genesis crossover. This does 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds, according to Genesis, which is faster than a little luxury SUV has any right to be. And I say that in part because it really is so luxurious. Most of the time when you're getting a sporty SUV, this kind of performance, you're making some trade-offs in terms of luxury, but this has all the luxury and big power up front. But you are paying for it. Like I said, GV70 starts around $41,000. This one is equipped to $64,500. You can see the window sticker here. It has literally every option. Even this color is an optional extra. And so you're paying a lot of money if you want all that power and all that luxury combined. But it's still pretty impressive, 375 horsepower. And so those are the quirks and features of the 2022 Genesis GV70. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the GV70. I gotta tell you, I'm surprised and impressed with this car. It's not very often that I go and review a car and it surprises me. Usually I kind of know what to expect. This, I got it and I was just blown away by the interior. It's just way better than I expected. And when I was doing the research for the script, I was blown away that it has 375 horsepower. I'm thinking, why isn't this being advertised? You'd think they'd be more all over this. This is the hottest segment right now. This is where people are buying cars, and I'm just not hearing that much about the GV70. I didn't even know it was out until some other people started posting reviews. I was like, I gotta get on that. It's just not been released to that much fanfare, but it's a good car on paper, and in practice, looking around and everything, it seems even better. So now let's drive. Okay, first impression getting in and driving, two important things. Number one, pretty like nice, like it's luxurious. You don't hear a lot. And in fact, you hear quite a bit less than in most other compact luxury SUVs. That's one big benefit that this car has. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot of great compact luxury SUVs, there really are. But this one seems nicer. It just does. It just simply has a better interior. It's almost like they delivered something that I think the industry has been lacking a little bit, which is people who don't want a huge car, but they want all the nice stuff from a huge car. Genesis has finally kind of put that together in some of its cars. This is like a nice luxury vehicle, but without just being huge. If you live in the city, you don't necessarily want something that large, this is that. Okay, next thing you notice when you drive this car, the power. The power is excellent. This engine has a lot of power, and something I love about good engines, it has a lot of mid-range power. So it's not just like you floor it from a stop and it's fast and that's cool. You also have usable good power when you're on the highway and you're trying to execute a quick pass, or you just want to get up on-ramp or whatever. And that I really, really like. With that said, it is dulled a little bit by its shifting. At the end of the day, this car is more tuned for a little bit more for luxury than it is for performance. This is a sportier Genesis, but it's still a Genesis, and they are kind of going more towards the luxury side of things. And so the transmission shifts, you can just tell, they're slower to make them smoother, but the result of that is they're just not as quick, and it's no comparison between like the Macan and PDK. The dual clutch transmission's a lot faster. Now, it's worth noting when you put it into sport mode, it has adjustable drive modes like most cars. You put it into sport mode, those shifts do tighten up a little bit. Throttle response tightens up a little bit. So it does feel a little bit quicker than in just sort of your regular comfort mode, but it's still not going to be a Macan. With that said, I mean, It says 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds. I believe it. It's a quick car. It drives unusually fast, and I'm quite impressed with the acceleration and the performance of this car. Now, in terms of handling, this is definitely a demerit for this car. It is, like they said, the sporty Genesis, but still a Genesis. It just doesn't handle great. You put it in sport mode, you have more weight to the steering. Like, sport mode changes the steering feel, but you can't do much about the fact that the car is genuinely tuned for more comfort than sport. And so it's understeers, it's not tremendously connected. It's obviously just fine. It's not like dangerous or bad. It's just luxury, you know, and as opposed to like sport, when you're thinking about like an SQ5 or an X3M or even an M40i, those cars are all more athletic than this one. But I would argue that this car is nicer. And you know, it's kind of funny, even compared to the brands that traditionally do luxury on the luxury side of things, like Mercedes-Benz, like Lexus, like Lincoln, this is better. This is definitely a better interior than Lincoln and Lexus. I think it's the new GLC. It's right on par with that, maybe even a little nicer than that. It's a great interior. It's a great car, and it's a great powertrain. And so that's the 2022 Genesis GV70. This is actually a bit of a surprise, a sporty and relatively good small luxury crossover from Genesis. This debuted without a lot of fanfare, but it is certainly one of my favorite little luxury SUVs. And now it's time to give the GV70 a DougScore. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the GV70 looks nice, distinctive, handsome, but ultimately it's still a little luxury crossover, not some beautiful sports car, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration, Genesis says 0 to 60 in the high 4-second range with this engine, which is excellent, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Handling is fine, normal for a car like this, but not excellent, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Fun factor is also fine. This is more luxury than fun, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and this is sort of cool since it's a neat new model, but it's not especially amazing or head-turning, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 24 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The GV70 has excellent equipment and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is normal for a car like this and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is excellent, on par with great rivals, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this and it gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, value is pretty strong. This isn't cheap, but it offers a lot. Good luxury, good equipment, good performance, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 36 out of 50. Added up, and the DougScore is 60 out of 100, which places the GV70 here against rivals. It beats out all the other small luxury SUVs except for the Porsche Macan, and the Macan only wins because of an advantage in the weekend scores, as you'd expect from a Porsche. I've been mostly lukewarm about new Genesis models, but the GV70 is really impressive, and I truly think it's probably the best compact luxury SUV on sale.